And then we'll have the videos if anyone wants to rewatch this later, or we can potentially use this for another class as well. Just a reminder to put any questions into the chat box. I have a lot of slides today that are literally says questions on it. So we'll wait until that point to do the questions. But if you need anything in the meantime, put it in the chat and someone will respond to you from our team. And just something that I'll be sending out later this week that I want to remind everyone, I'm going to send out a REDCap survey. It'll come from a REDCap email, and it's going to ask you how you want your name to be shown on your certificate for the class. So make sure to respond to that so we print your name correctly. Okay, I'm trying to think if I have any more reminders. Guys, did I forget anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So we have quite a bit of content to cover today, and I apologize, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, but I've inserted in a lot of polls as well to kind of keep you engaged and interested. So keep an eye out for when a slide comes up that says polls so that you can make sure to participate. If I'm going too quickly, or if you have a question, like I said, put it in the chat. And we'll also record this in case you want to watch it again later. And class is kind of split up into two halves today. The first half is what you see on the slide, covering grant lifecycle, finding funding, and understanding FOAs, which are funding opportunity announcements. Oops. There we go. Okay, so our first topic is grant lifecycle review, and then we'll talk about funding strategies and then funding opportunities. So I hope you guys all watched the video from Shane Kraus on the life cycle of a sponsored project. Many thanks to Shane for letting us share this video with you all. And Shane was who presented with us last week, who you guys all met. And I wanted to get us started with a question asking, which part of the grant life cycle do you spend the most time working on? So I'm going to launch a poll question, and if you work in some of these areas equally, you can select multiple answers. Okay. Okay, great. Looks like we've got quite a few responses. The majority of people, it looks like, works in project management, which is great. That's pretty much what we all do as well. But you also work in proposal development, finding funding. Okay, this is great. All right, I'm going to end the poll. So we are going to be covering the first two topics in today's class, finding funding and proposal development. So I'm glad to see that some of you may not have very much experience in finding funding, and we're going to talk about that. Okay. All right, so you've likely heard the terms pre and post award. This refers to the activities that are made before and after an award is made. So GAIN Part 1 that we are currently doing covers pre-award, and then GAIN Part 2, which we're going to be doing hopefully sometime early next year, is going to be covering post-award. And so as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing today kind of on these first three items: finding funding, preparing a proposal, and then submitting a proposal. If you want to learn a little bit more about the NIH grant life cycle, I've put some resources at the bottom there in case you want to watch it later. All right, so that was grant life cycle. We're now going to move on to funding strategies. So this session is going to cover who funds grants, what do they fund, and will they fund me and my organization? And today we are going to focus mostly on the NIH grants process and NIH grant components, because this is where our team has the most experience, but we also feel like it's one of the more complicated funding streams. There are so many different pieces of both submitting and then managing NIH grants. However, there are many different funders and they all have different systems and requirements and formatting. So what we cover today may not be relevant to everyone. However, we do feel like this is one of the more complicated methods. So if you can do this, you can likely submit other grants. All right, so many different organizations give grants, and we've kind of classified them into these three categories. First one is foundations. Foundations, or maybe you would hear it as a nonprofit, generally have a scientific or a service agenda. And sometimes they target specific regions or areas that they want to work in. Some examples of this are the Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust. You've probably heard of those. Next, we have corporate. This is mostly going to be companies such as pharmaceutical companies, technology companies, and the work that they fund aligns with their company identity or mission. And sometimes they'll have a foundation connected to their for-profit company, and that's who does their charitable work. So that would be someone like Johnson & Johnson, and then Pfizer, I'm sure you all have heard of at this point. And then lastly is the government. So government grants are generally broader in scope. They have very detailed application processes. And some examples are these are some of our US organizations, the NIH, USAID, but also globally, World Health Organization. Okay, so this is the structure of how global health is funded through the US government. You might be, this might be too tiny, but you hopefully are familiar with a few of the organizations listed here: PEPFAR, USAID, CDC, et cetera. And a lot of the funding that we apply for at Vanderbilt is US government funding. We also describe this as federal funding. And you can see here the structure of how this is funded is kind of complicated. There are a lot of different groups. But US investigators primarily get grant funding from these organizations. So if you're working with us as a partner on a grant, it's probably going to be to one of these organizations. Most of the time it'll be to NIH. But I also encourage you guys to familiarize yourself with the array of funding that you are eligible for and that US citizens are not. Okay, so here's the structure of the National Institutes of Health. The NIH is the principal health research agency for the US government. The NIH is made up of many different institutes, and each institute has a specific scientific focus. They're all listed here, and these are the full names written out, but you probably have seen different acronyms used, and there's Fogarty. So for example, Fogarty International Center is often abbreviated as an acronym as FIC. So you might see that. And the institutes sometimes collaborate together if a grant topic crosses both of their scientific interests. And most of them are very active on social media, and you can sign up for their newsletters as well. NIH has two ways that they provide funding to international partners. They will either award a grant directly to an international organization, or an international organization may be listed as a subaward or a subcontract to a US organization. And that's called NIH calls it a foreign component. I don't love how NIH uses the term foreign in place of international, but you're going to see this a lot in their documentation. So there's a few reasons why NIH supports international research. An application may present a special opportunity to advance research through use of unusual talent, resource populations, or environmental conditions that are not available in the US, or maybe they augment existing US resources. Additionally, it could have specific relevance to the mission objective of the Institute and has the potential to significantly advance science in that field. So how do you figure out who funds what? There's so many different funding organizations. First, you can check funder websites. Many have newsletters, they are on social media. There are also funding aggregator websites that'll send you notifications when something is posted. I'll get into that in a few slides. You can check the acknowledgement or funding section of different manuscripts or posters in the scientific field that you're looking at. You can also sometimes identify sponsors at a conference. If you look at like the logos on some of the conference print materials or web materials. And then lastly, you may hear by word of mouth from other administrators or from other investigators. So searching and identifying funding sources takes a lot of time. For some people, this is their whole job. So you may want to create a new inbox for these types of emails or newsletters that you get, and then you could like carve out time once or twice a month to kind of go through all of them. If this is a skill set that you're interested in building, finding funding, you might want to start by making a list of funding agencies that you want to follow, and then you can start signing up for all of their emails and social media. Holly has a great resource of a list of funding agencies, and we're going to share that after class. Okay, so your PI comes to you and says, I have this really great idea for a grant. Just because it's a good idea doesn't mean it's going to get funded. So something that you really want to make sure of is that your idea isn't already funded. A funding agency will likely not fund the same grant twice. So I'm going to show you a few different databases that you can use to look up projects that are already funded. And this is a great way also to find collaborators in your field or in the field that your investigators are working in, as you'll see people with similar grant projects. Okay, this first database is Federal Reporter. This shows any US federal grants that are funded through every type of federal organization. So NIH, CDC, National Science Foundation, there's a lot of options. All of these databases have searchable fields. You can filter based on like the type of grant, the type of agency, the organization that's getting the grant. And then you can also download most of the data. And for all of these websites, I'm putting the link to them in the bottom right corner of the slides. The next one is World Report. This database highlights global research from tons of companies and organizations, basically all the largest biomedical research agencies in the world. It has both government and foundation, nonprofits, some corporations. So there's a lot of data in World Report. And it has very similar features to the previous database to search and filter, and you can download the data. The next one is specific to NIH. This is the NIH Reporter. And as I mentioned, same features to search, sort, download. There's also a really nice feature in NIH Reporter called Matchmaker. You can insert text of like let's say your PI sends you a blurb about a project, you could insert text into Matchmaker and then search for similar projects. And that may help you to determine if that project is too similar to yours or not. And I put a link to a YouTube video at the bottom there that shows you exactly how NIH Matchmaker works, if that's something that you're interested in. And a great way to engage with funding agencies is through their social media. So here's an example of Fogarty at NIH. They have a newsletter, a Twitter account, a Facebook account, and they will often post things to these sources before you're even going to get an email about it. So this is just an example of places to look to sign up for their accounts. Okay, so your PI has this great idea. You looked it up in NIH Reporter, and you found that this project is totally new and novel, and nothing like this has been funded already. What you should do next is have your investigator contact the funding agency. It's a great way to gauge if they are interested in your research before you go through all the effort of applying. For NIH, all of the FOAs will include contact names for the program officer, for review staff, for the grants management staff. And all of the websites have organization charts and contact lists to help you find someone to talk to. Or if you already have a name, you can look it up in the NIH staff directory. And having this conversation really ensures that you're directing your grant application to the right place. Okay, so we are wrapping up this first session. I want to hear from you guys. What types of organizations does your institute have funding from? And you can select all that apply. Let me do the poll. Okay. It looks like almost everyone has government funding. More than half of GAIN participants have foundation funding, and even almost half have corporation funding. Okay. This is a great, I'll share you the results. This is great. Everything is kind of spread evenly across these three categories. Okay. And now I'm gonna do a fun quiz question. So your PI wants to submit a grant to NIH. What should you encourage them to do? And you can select all that apply. Okay, you guys all got the right idea. So the answer was the bottom three. Look up funded projects with similar keywords in Reporter, contact the funding institute, and find a specific FOA that addresses that topic. Nobody selected the first one, so that's great. You don't want to just submit it. Okay, so I'm now gonna, here's here's one of my question slides that you'll see quite frequently throughout the presentation. So any questions on funders and funding strategies? Do we have anything in the chat, you guys? I guess I can look.
No, we don't really.
No. Okay, no problem. All right, well then I'm going to move forward, but if you think of anything, put it in the chat. All right, we're going to move on to now talking about funding opportunities. So our game plan for this session is to talk about the terms associated with funding opportunities, where to find them, how to read them, and then how to get started on an application. So this is just a quick review of some of the terms associated with funding opportunities. You may see these written in many different ways, and they will likely depend on the funder. So we've got FOA, Funding Opportunity Announcement, RFA, Request for Applications, RFP, Request for Proposals, CFA, Call for Applications, and CFP, Call for Proposals. That's a mouthful. I'm making a joke here about alphabet soup. But so we already talked about how to find what's already funded. And now we're going to look at different databases you can use to find an active funding opportunity to apply for. So these are grants that have already been made, and then these are calls for new grant applications. All right, I'm going to start with US federal opportunities, which can all be found on grants.gov. This is the largest of the US federal search tools, and you'll find opportunities here from NIH, CDC, USAID, National Science Foundation. Every organization will post here. And so you'll click search grants from grants.gov, and it'll take you to their database search page, and you'll be able to search based on keyword, the organization that's awarding the grants, when the grant is due. There's lots of different options to sort them, type of grant. And as I've done previously, all the links here are at the bottom. And most of these databases, have this save search feature. So if you set up a search, then you can go back to it instead of having to redo all your filters all over again. Now, moving on to NIH, you'll find everything that you need to know about NIH on the NIH Grants and Funding website. This is one of my most frequented web pages. It has grant application instructions, FAQs, a glossary if you don't know what a certain term means, lots of policy and compliance information. And we'll talk about many of these resources, but for now, just be aware that it's all there. Okay, so to find an FOA on this website, you'll go to Funding, Find Funding, and then a search page will appear. And this is an example just of me searching for the term tuberculosis. I work for our Vanderbilt Tuberculosis Center, so a lot of my examples today are TB related. So maybe that's useful to some of you. But same thing, you can search and filter by the type of grant, to the institute that it's going to, when it's due, when it expires, all sorts of things. And again, it has the same save your search feature that that grants.gov has. And you'll see here, this is just an example of some of the acronyms associated with NIH. So this says NIAID, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. You can also go directly to an institute's own website. So here we have Fogarty, for example. They will post opportunities that are specific to their institute on their website. And if you're interested in getting NIH FOAs and updates, I would subscribe to this weekly newsletter that they send out. They send it out every Friday, and it has general notices and changes to policies, all kinds of information. I put the link to sign up at the bottom. This is generally a pretty long email, but I normally skim through it kind of quickly to see if there's any new opportunities relevant to my team or any changes to policies that I should be aware of. Okay, and also, as I mentioned, all of the institutes have their own email listserv. And so you can see here, we submit a lot of grants to NIAID. So I'm signed up for all of the NIAID emails. They've got alerts, funding news, funding opportunities. They'll post concepts that they're discussing for funding before they even become an active FOA. You'll be informed about things right away if you know that your PI or your investigative group is specifically, their science fits specifically with one institute. And then you don't have to go through that long list that I previously showed. And then, as I mentioned before, everyone's on social media. So if you have a Twitter or Facebook, maybe you can find them there. All right, so many of you are eligible for way more options than just NIH and US government grants. For foundations and nonprofits, many of them are going to have their own websites. So here's an example of the Wellcome Trust. There are also many types of free to paid databases that compile grant opportunities for you. I found this nice blog about the best free places to search for grant funding, and I've linked that for you below. Another website is Funds for NGOs. There are different levels of access. You can use it for free, but you can also pay a premium to get access to more resources. It also has a funding opportunity database. It has training resources and also sample proposals, and they also send newsletters out. You may also find funding through different professional organizations, such as this example of the African Academy for Sciences. They post funding opportunities, training opportunities, networking events, and webinars that are tailored specifically for African scientists. And they also send a newsletter. I haven't found anything specific like this for Latin America, but if you guys know of something, please let me know. I'd love to share it. And then lastly, some of the partners that you work with may post opportunities as well. We do, for example, the IGH has a searchable open access database for funding opportunities. You can search by country, funding agency, again, lots of search options. Holly, shout out Holly, also posts funding opportunities on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, start following Holly. Her username is right there, and she sends out lots of good grants. And then if you're working in TB, I post FOAs to our website as well, sometimes Twitter. I'm not as good of a tweeter as Holly is. Okay, you've found an FOA. It seems perfect for your research. How do you make sure you are eligible and understand this FOA? It's so freaking long. So we are now going to talk about just how to understand different components of reading an FOA. So NIH tends to focus their FOAs in 3 categories that I've listed here. And I wanted to just show you this terminology in case you've seen it and didn't know what it meant. Program announcements, they generally highlight an area of focus they have ongoing standard deadlines, meaning they're repetitive and they're going to go on for a while until they expire. Requests for applications, RFAs, have generally a more narrow focus. They normally only have 1 or maybe 2 deadlines, and they have set aside specific funds for this project. So that means if this RFA is a really good fit, you should move forward right away because it may not show up again. And then parent announcements are the most broad. So if your investigator has an idea that doesn't fit into a specific program announcement or an RFA, I would encourage them to submit to a parent announcement. And this just means that the investigator can propose whatever science they want. But as I mentioned earlier, contact the funding agency to make sure that they're interested in that specific research. And so here are just 3 examples of these different types using grants that my team has applied to. Well, we're about to apply to this one, the Report Brazil. So this is like a general program announcement. It's not for like a specific scientific topic, but for this example, it's like a network that they are funding. For this RFA, this was for development of TB vaccines. This was like a very specific topic for one RFA. And then, you know, if we can't find a TB RFA that fits our research at the time that we want to submit a grant, we'll just submit to the parent R01 grant. And these things are numbered pretty wonky. I'm not going to go into detail about this, but just so you know, in case you're interested, that's how they number them. All right, NIH has many different types of grants. They will all have certain letters associated with them. So for example, R grants are research grants, K grants are for career development, and so on. And I've provided lists there at the bottom of the full list of the different types of grants if you want to learn more about those. So the type of grant that you apply for can dictate how much funding you're going to get and what is the budget for the project. So I provided a list here of the most popular research grants, and you'll see that they each have different project periods and budgets. So R03s are for 2 years and direct costs of $50,000 per year. R21s are also 2 years, but they have a little bit higher budget. The total cost for the total direct cost for the 2-year period is $275,000. So about $150,000 each year. And then the biggest, skipping ahead. The biggest is R01s. That is 5 years of funding for direct costs of up to $500,000 per year. You can even request more than that, but you have to request permission before you submit a grant of that size. So NIH FOAs, they're generally super long. So you open these web pages and you're like, where the heck do I even start reading this thing? The nice thing about these NIH FOAs is that they're always going to follow the exact same format. So if you get familiar with it, it's never going to change unless they issue some policy change, but they're generally all going to look pretty similar. So I provided the general table of contents, how each one's formatted. And the first part is just an overview with key dates. And then part 2 is the text of the full announcement. The very, very, very first thing that you want to do is make sure that you are eligible for a specific FOA. If you are not eligible for an FOA, and when I say you, I mean your PI or your organization, if they are not eligible, you don't even have to read the rest of the thing. So that is the first thing that you should check. If it's not clear, contact the program official or the organization to double check if you are eligible. But for the PI, eligibility may depend on their education level. Are they doctoral? Are they clinical? Something, are they a PhD? Something like that. maybe citizen requirements, like if certain organizations say only for LMIC countries, you'll have to check eligibility, and then other qualifications and expertise. And the eligibility of the organization may depend on their organization status. Are you a nonprofit? Are you an institute of higher education? Maybe your ability to handle grant dollars. They may want some proof of we have X many grants that we already manage. And then lastly, capacity to conduct research. So here is the eligibility section for NIH in an NIH FOA. You'll see a specific section for foreign institutions. So if it says foreign institutions are eligible to apply, then you're good to go. Sometimes you'll see it where a foreign institution is not eligible to apply, but foreign components are allowed. So in that case, you could be a subcontract on that grant. All right, a brief checklist to follow when you open an RFA is make sure that your NIH institute or center is listed as a participating organization. If they're not listed, you won't be able to submit your grant to them. Submit your applications to a specific and active FOA. Use the links in the FOA to access your application forms, and always just read it carefully and read the instructions carefully to make sure that you understand all the guidelines. And I put a link there about a video of how to choose the right FOA. NIH deadlines can be a little bit tricky. If an FOA says it has standard deadlines, they will follow the ones that I've shown here. So if it's related to HIV, it'll be due in January, May, or September. If it's not HIV related, it'll be due in February, June, or October. However, if you are submitting a resubmission or renewal grant, you might have a totally different deadline. So always triple check this. And I've provided the link for the NIH application deadlines, and that goes into more detail. So this is just a brief checklist you can use to make sure that you've picked the right NIH deadline. The first thing, if it's a specific RFA with a specific deadline, that's the only option. You gotta apply to that one. If it's not a specific RFA and it has multiple deadlines, you should check what type of grant is it. Is it HIV or non-HIV related? Is it a new application, a resubmission, or a renewal? And then lastly, is an LOI or a letter of intent required? Sometimes they'll request you to send an LOI to the funding agency a month ahead of the deadline. So if that's required for the application and you've missed the LOI date, you won't be able to apply. And ultimately, the deadline you choose will affect when the application gets funded. So let's say that my team submits a January 7th grant. It'll get reviewed in February or March. It'll go to the NIH Advisory Council in May. And then the earliest that it would start would be July. So in this case, when I'm putting together my grant, I would use July 1st as my budget start date for the application. Okay, that was a lot. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to an activity where we're going to look at an FOA together?
Hey, Hillary, we do have one question from Cindy Berry about does every PI qualify for a grant? How do you determine that? I know you went over it, but you may want to.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Cindy. The answer is no, they may not always qualify for a grant. So certain grants have, on the PI level, it may be based on country of citizenship. So that's one thing to check. Another thing is just where they are in their career. So there are certain grants that are for early stage investigators, ESI. And so depending on where your PI is in their career, they may not be eligible for an ESI grant, but they would be eligible for a different type of grant. So it's definitely something to look at. NIH does have a whole section in their application or in their FOA about PI eligibility. And I think we'll look at that as we move on to this activity. Did that answer your question, Simbiri? Let me know if you have something else. All right, great. So we are now going to look at an NIH FOA together. So everybody wake up after my lecture and we are going to search for an FOA. And I think Donna is going to put this in the chat also. So go to the NIH grants.gov website and click that link to open the search engine. And then we are going to search for PAR 21344. And just a little hint, if you're having trouble finding that, put that whole thing in quotations. So quote PAR-21-344, end quote. And then click open the RFA link once you find it. I can't see you guys. If you guys could just let me know once you've found the RFA, that'd be great. How's everybody doing? Got a couple found that say they found it. Thanks, guys. Is anybody having problems? Donna can send the direct link if you're having problems.
Want me to go ahead and put it in?
Yeah. Okay, so if you couldn't find it, here's the link. That was just practice using a search database. All right, so everybody open up that link. And we're gonna go through some questions looking at different parts of the RFA. And so I sent you guys before class the annotated NIH RFA. That is such a great resource to kind of see which sections of the RFA do I really need to be paying attention to. Yes, it's the intervention for stigma reduction, exactly. And so hopefully you took a look at the annotated FOA and that'll make this activity a little bit easier. All right, we are going to go to our first question, which is, which institutes could you submit this grant to? So take a look at the RFA, and you're likely going to be able to submit to multiple institutes. So take a look at that. Oh no. Somehow my polls went away. Hey, game team. It says I'm logged in from another device. Your polling session is inactive. Can somebody launch FOA1 poll?
Done.
Thanks, Anne.
Sorry, I'll try and fix that during our break. Okay, now I can't even see the poll.
I can see it. There's no one that's answered the poll just yet, but I don't know
Okay,
because the answers are coming in now. I think probably everyone was sort of, reading
Yeah.
the way.
exactly. Okay,
Yeah, so
great.
feel free to take your time. I'll let you know when we've kind of reached a critical mass.
Awesome. Thank you.
7 respondents.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, no problem. So we're still at 7. So for those of you who are reviewing the FOA, you can find which institutes could you submit this grant to. Got 10 responses now.
Okay, great. I'm gonna move forward. And if you didn't find it, it's okay. I'm gonna show you where it is. So
Okay, I'm going to end the poll at 13 respondents and share the results. Hillary, let me know if you can see them now.
I think I can. I can't see anything, but it's okay.
It's spread pretty evenly between FIC, NICHD, NIAID, and CI. And then there were a few that said NHLBI.
Okay, great. So the answers were FIC, NICHD, and NCI. So when you looked at this section, it says participating organizations. That'll show you the list of which institutes are accepting applications. So NIAID and NHLBI are not listed here, so they will not be able to review this grant. So if you really want them to review it, this is not going to be the right RFA to apply for. Any questions about this one? All right, let's move on to our next question. Okay, could you submit a clinical trial to this FOA? Yes, no, or you don't know. And it's FOA question 2.
It looks like someone else started it.
That was me.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared for that.
All right, how are we doing on responses?
We're at 15.
Okay, I think let's end it.
We've got 12 of those 15 were a yes, 2 no's, and 1 unsure.
Great. Okay, so the answer to this question was yes, you could submit a clinical trial to this FOA. So when you look at the title of the funding opportunities, it'll say in the title, this one says clinical trial optional. So it means, maybe this wasn't worded very good, but you could submit one or you could not submit one. But it is possible to do a clinical trial for this FOA, and it'll tell you right in the title if that's even an option or not. All right, next question. When could you submit this grant? And you could select multiple answers for this question. And this is poll FOA 3.
We've got just a few responses coming in, only, well, now we're up to 6. So maybe folks are just taking some time to
Gotta find the deadline section.
the FOA, exactly. We're up to 11 now. We've got 14.
All right, great. I think let's end it.
So we're pretty evenly distributed between all 3 of the responses. Standard deadline,
Okay.
December 2021, December 2022.
Okay, great. So the answer was you could submit to either or both of the December deadlines. And so you'll see this section here in the RFA, it said December 20th, 2021, and then also December 20th, 2022. So if it gives you a specific deadline like this, you are not eligible to submit for a standard deadline. So you'll have to follow what they say in the FOA. And in this case, I think if you looked farther down, it actually did say that you could submit a renewal or a resubmission. So let's say you submitted first for December and it didn't get funded, you could submit a resubmission for the next December deadline. And it would just be at the same time. This section is a little confusing. It just means that it's the same deadline for all types of applications, no matter what the status is. Okay, next question. You might have to do some math on this one. Which of these budget and project periods is allowable under this FOA? And these dollars are listed as direct costs. So basically this is saying for option 1, your year 1 budget would be $200,000. Your year 2 budget would be $200,000 for a combined budget of $400,000. So find the section in the FOA that talks about the budget. And Anne or whoever, that's, I think we're on number 4.
It's launched. No responses yet, but we understand this one might take a little more time also.
Yes, this one requires some math.
Yeah, take your time. We're up to 11 respondents. But for those of you who haven't responded, feel free to keep going. So 13.
All right, I think in the essence of time, let's end that, Anne. Thank you.
So in terms of the responses, the majority of responses, 8 out of 15, were that all of them are allowable. From there, 4 folks chose C, 2 chose B, and 1 chose A. So
Okay,
everything.
great. The answer was they're all allowable. Trick question. So I hope you found the section that said award budget and award project period. So this one, I picked this RFA because it had a kind of an interesting budget. It said you can have up to 3 years for your project period, and your total combined budget cannot exceed 400,000 direct costs. And then you can't have more than 200,000 direct costs in a single year. So in option 1, even though it says you can request up to 3 years, that's not required. So you could just submit for 2 years of this grant if for some reason you think you can get it done really fast. So that would be allowable. And then the next 2 options, same thing. I did it for 3 years, and as long as you didn't exceed $200,000 direct costs in 1 year, it was allowable. So I hope that was some fun math for you on this fine Tuesday. All right, here is our last question. Which of these organizations would be eligible to apply for this grant? And keep in mind that this grant is for LMIC institutions. So take a look at the eligibility section and let me know what you think.
9 respondents so far.
Great.
Holding steady at 10. Don't know if anyone else is going to answer.
Let's end it, and I can show you where to find it if you haven't found it already.
So the responses were 6 out of 10 chose the Research Institute in India, 3 chose the Institute of Higher Education in Canada, and 1 also included the nonprofit in New Zealand.
All right. So the answer was the Research Institute in India. So taking a look at this eligibility section, this is kind of underneath the eligible organizations. First, it'll tell you which types of organizations are eligible. And then if there's any other criteria that you need to be aware of, it'll state it right underneath that. So that's this section here. And it says that non-domestic, so any international institutions, are restricted to higher education and or research institutions and nonprofits in LMICs, which are defined by the World Bank as, and they go through their definition, and then they're going to show you a link. So this happens a lot when you look for grants. They'll say only this country list or this classification is eligible. So in this case, you would have need to gone to that link and just search, for example, your country name. Search your country name and see where you fall in the World Bank's list to see if you're eligible. So in this case, the only LMIC country out of these 4 was India. So that was the only place that could apply. It also said, I think US institutions were also eligible for this if they had an LMIC partner, but none of these were in the US. So that was pretty mean of me, huh? All right, guys, we are gonna wrap up. That was our last FOA question, and we are now going to wrap up this section on FOAs. So you've gone through the FOA, you now know where to find all the sections that you should be looking for. What should you do next? Contact the funding agency. At the bottom of every NIH FOA, they have scientific and research contact listed. Have your PI reach out to them and schedule a meeting to see if you would be a good fit for this FOA. And then here's just a brief checklist that you can use to make sure that you're choosing the right FOA. First and foremost, make sure that you're eligible. Then make sure that your idea is a priority for the funder and see if they had funded similar projects like this in the past. Check the deadline. Are you going to be able to submit this in time? How much money is the FOA for? And is that going to be enough to cover your project costs? And then lastly, contact the program officer or the funding agency. All right, this is wrapping up our first half of class here. Does anyone have any questions or comments just about that first section or the activity? Feel free to put it in.
Sorry,
the
there are
chat.
no questions in the chat, but
Okay. All right, great. Since I've been talking a lot, I'm going to give everyone a 5-minute break and myself. I'm going to, hold on, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, team, I'm going to log off and log back on so that I can make sure I can do the polls again. But I want to put in something for you to listen to because this is a lot of heavy content. So here is a musical, oops, that's to Donna. This is a musical break, so you can put this song on during your bathroom break, okay? Okay, we're gonna come back.
I love it.
We're gonna come back at 8:13. See everyone in a few minutes.